Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Mr. Miracle #2. Tom King is hitting it out of the park. This series is really good. It's getting better and better, and the two beautiful covers. And I love these two covers so much. I sort of combined them, and well, you saw at the front there what I did. I kind of like having a little fun with the graphics and stuff. It's a lot of fun. Mr. Miracle #2. It continues the fantastic opening issue that we saw. And just to review, the opening issue had Scott Free apparently trying to kill himself as if he was infected by the anti-life equation, and that dark side is that sort of infected every panel as issue 1 progressed. Issue 2 takes place basically right after #1 finishes off, and Scott Free, Mr. Miracle, and his wife Big Barda, they're clearly fighting on New Genesis. They've taken the battlefield to Darkseid. Issue starts off very clearly. Orion is commanding Mr. Miracle and Big Barda to fight across various battle places around Apocalypse and New Genesis. The X Pit. They fought in the X Pit. Through the Path of Flowers, Cronefall Forest, all these crazy names that are located on either Apocalypse or New Genesis. I'm not really sure where it is, but clearly there's a huge battle that's taking place, and of course Mr. Miracle is fighting for New Genesis. It's a brilliance to the storytelling here that just really says so much. Just like the 9-panel grid, how it was used in the first issue to such brilliant effect. It's continued here, only this time it's continued on a battlefield, and each page again, each page along the issue has basically nine panels, and it's used to such great effect because as Mr. Miracle is commanded by Orion to go to different places on the battlefield, the sequences between the panels becomes less and less, basically showing that Mr. Miracle is getting overworked. Both him and Big Barda are getting overworked. He's fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, and it's just one fight, one battle after another, and they're winning the battle. At least it looks like they're winning the battle, but they're absolutely exhausted. And and it's clear that the coloring here is dark and gloomy. You know, it's I thought it was an interesting choice of colors. At first, I was a little taken aback because at first I thought it was blood. It was Mr. Miracle's blood that was all over him because he's covered with his blood, and even there's a point in the comic where he's trying to shower and he's got blood all over him, but it's not red blood, so I think it's parademon blood. I didn't know parademon blood was green, or sort of a slimy lime green, but apparently it is because they're covered in blood. Fortunately, it's not their own. And what's really interesting here is Mr. Miracle is of course, he's got this beautiful costume, Mr. Miracle. It's yellow, red, green. It's kind of it's a very bright color, and yet he's doing so much battle that when you look at Mr. Miracle in battle, he's all red. It's almost like the way he's drawn. It's like he's wearing a battle suit where he is completely covered in parademon blood, and his costume is all. You don't see any of the yellow. You don't see any. It's not his traditional costume. It doesn't look like it anyway, or if it is, it's completely in tatters, and it's really covered with battle rips and tears and parademon blood. You really get a sense that this is definitely a side of Mr. Miracle that we're not used to seeing. So artistically, the visuals here, it's very different visuals than how we normally are accustomed to seeing Mr. Miracle, particularly as drawn by Jack Kirby, or even how he was artistically rendered in battle in the Darkseid War, drawn by Jason Fabok. This is very different. Mitch Gerads, the artist here, he's done an excellent job, and artistically, he's conveying a different type of visual that is consistent with Tom King's story. After these battles, they report to Orion. Now, Highfather apparently is dead, has been killed, and now Orion, who is Highfather. Now Orion is actually Darkseid's son, but if you remember. Just to backtrack, thousands of years ago, Darkseid and Highfather, so Darkseid of Apocalypse and Highfather of New Genesis, in order to, pursuant to a peace treaty, they exchanged their firstborn. So Orion is actually Darkseid's son, and he was raised by Highfather, and Mr. Miracle is actually was raised by Darkseid, or essentially under Granny Goodness. And Granny Goodness is the one who sort of ran Darkseid's forces and trained Darkseid's soldiers. And what's interesting here is Orion and Mr. Miracle, they do not like each other. But Orion is now the Highfather. And it's quite clear right up front that Orion resents, you can tell there's tension between Orion and Mr. Miracle. And Orion wants Mr. Miracle. He wants Scott free to refer to him as Highfather, but he doesn't. It says there's a sequence here where Orion is trying to communicate with Mr. Miracle on the battlefield, and he says, "General Free," and Mr. Miracle says, "Yes, Orion," and he says, "I am not that's not my name. I'm Highfather now," but he doesn't call him that. So that fosters some resentment, and there's a fantastic sequence where Big Barda and Mr. Miracle are in front of Orion, and basically Light Race, who speaks on behalf of Orion, basically tells him that, you know, there's new formalities that are gonna come into play. Now you kneel before me. So basically Orion makes Big Barda and particularly Mr. Miracle kneel, and you know that Scott Free does not want to kneel. I mean, and the excellent art. I mean, this sequence, it just spells, there's so much characterization here. You can tell the tension between brothers, the resentment. It's just excellent. So much characters being portrayed with no dialogue, just from the art. And so that's just absolutely brilliant on the part of Mitch Gerads. I apologize, I'm butchering his name, Mitch Gerads. He's just really hitting it on the art. And because you got to, when you think about it for a second, Orion was raised by Highfather, but Orion is Darkseid's son. So Orion always has a lot of anger in him. And what's ironic is Orion, who's raised by Highfather on New Genesis, you would think that he would be more of the peaceful brother, and you'd think that Mr. Miracle, who was raised on Apokolips, would have anger in him, would be very aggressive, but it's quite the opposite. Orion is the one filled with anger and is super aggressive, and he's raised by Highfather. And yet Mr. Miracle, who was raised in darkness, was raised in the pit of Apokolips, was the first one to escape Apokolips, escape the hordes of Granny Goodness's training, that he's the one that seems to be more at peace and have more calm in him. He seems to be he's the more sober second thought kind of guy. Orion is the one that's usually quick to anger. Mr. Miracle is the one that's more thoughtful, and he's more introspective. And he has to be that way because he's the escape artist. And an escape artist, you've got to be able to focus on what it is you need to escape from. And so it's very interesting, the dichotomy between those brothers, if you will, the dichotomy between Orion and Mr. Miracle. And Mr. Miracle and Orion have always resented each other. And you got to wonder what Orion, it's easy to imagine what that resentment must be. Because here is Orion. Orion must have some level of respect for for Scott, because Scott was raised by Darkseid, and he overcame that evil. He escaped the upbringing of Darkseid to embrace good. Orion had to be raised good in order to be good, and he still has some anger and darkness in him. And so Orion, in so many ways, had all the benefits of being raised better, in a better environment, and yet still seems to maintain and hang on to so much anger. Whereas the incredible thing about Mr. Miracle, Scott Free, is that he's raised by an evil god, and he somehow managed to keep his humanity and keep his light. And in many ways, I think he's a more inspiring character, because Mr. Miracle has always managed to embrace his inner light, whereas Orion has always stayed angry, despite even being raised on New Genesis by Highfather. Now, after this battle, Orion, or Highfather as he insists on being called now, I'm just going to call him Orion because calling him Highfather will just be confusing to longtime New Gods fans. Orion commands Big Barda and Mr. Miracle to use the boom tube, the mother box, to boom tube it to wherever Granny Goodness is, and to kill Granny Goodness. You got to kill Granny Goodness, because Granny Goodness is, even though we're winning the battle, and one part of New Genesis. We're losing the battle on another part because of Granny Goodness. Granny Goodness is very loyal to Darkseid, and she basically trained Big Barda, and she also had a lot to do with the upbringing of Mr. Miracle. But Orion commands them to use the mother box to boom tube in and to kill Granny Goodness. And their job is they're supposed to leave tomorrow the next day to do that. And that night, while they're sleeping in their bed, there's a wonderful sequence where Scott Free has a dream and where he's spoken to by Metron, and Metron says to him, "Do you understand, Scott Free? You are not to know the face of God." It's Metron saying to him, you are not to know the face of God. Now, what's interesting is that's a reference, I think, if you recall in the first issue, Scott remembers himself as a young boy drawing the face of God, where he talks to his teacher, and the teacher asks him what he's doing, and as a young boy, Scott says to the teacher, "Well, I'm drawing God," and the teacher says, "Well, nobody knows what God looked like," and young Scott Free says, "Well, they do now," implying that Scott Free has seen the face of God. And yet here we are in a second issue, Metron appears to Scott in a dream telling him, "You are not to know the face of God." Metron is implying that Scott has seen a God, has seen the face of God. Who is Metron referring to when Metron says God? Do you understand, Scott Free? You are not to know the face of God. Who is Metron referring to? I guess the obvious answer would be Darkseid. And if Scott Free is not to know the face of God, well, everyone's seen Darkseid. Lots of people have seen Darkseid. Is it something more? Or is it the case where, in fact, Scott only thinks he's seen the face of God, whether that was either Highfather or Darkseid, but maybe he's infected with anti-life. I say again, and that's what makes this issue so interesting. This whole storyline is maybe all this has taken place in Scott Free's head, and maybe none of this has actually really taken place on New Genesis. Maybe this is all just a figment of Mr. Miracle's imagination, and that he's not to know the face of God, and so if he thinks he's seen God, it's only because the anti-life has infected him and is telling him what he's seeing, and it's all part of this massive manipulation. Now, in addition to that, the next morning when they get up, Scott reflects upon being cared for when he was young by Granny Goodness. Now, Granny Goodness was all about torture, humiliation, about really being very a hard-ass trainer and commander to her forces. Yet Scott, in a moment of reflection, seems to recall a time where Granny Goodness actually showed him some compassion. And he asked Big Barda if she basically ever remembered Granny Goodness showing her any kind of affection herself, or basically he asks Big Barda, "Did you ever like her? Did you ever like Granny Goodness?" And Big Barda just says, "No, she never did." And yet Scott has memories where Granny Goodness showed him compassion. And again, those memories that Scott has, are those implanted memories in him, or are those real? I'm still not sure what is real and what isn't here, but clearly Scott is going through a crisis. Mr. Miracle is going through a crisis of conscience here, and he's second guessing himself, and he's second guessing how he feels about the situation, even about the war. There's tensions between him and Orion. He's got second thoughts about what he's feeling about Granny Goodness. He doesn't really seem to be on his game. We got to remember that he just came off an attempted suicide in issue 1. Mr. Miracle has definitely been in a better place, not to mention the fact that he's right smack and dab in the middle of a massive war against the forces of Apocalypse. This guy, there's a lot of forces, psychological and physical, coming on him all at once. And you gotta wonder how that has an impact on him. You gotta remember that Scott himself is, he's the son of Highfather, so I guess he's the son of a god. But in many ways, he portrays more humanity than godhood, and those forces in and of themselves could have a disastrous impact on a normal person. And if he's also infected with anti-life, who knows where this story is going to go? But there's a lot of excitement coming up. You just know this is building towards something. There's some deception. There are deceptions that are continuing here, and this story is only going to get better. Now, when they finally meet up with Granny Goodness, it is a sequence which, again, the 9-panel grid just does wonders, and you can only imagine what's going on under the surface and in the minds of these characters. And there's something about when there's a 9-panel grid like that, you got to wonder what is actually going on in the minds of Granny Goodness. What is she thinking? She must know that they're there to kill her, and yet she greets Scott as if, you know, she was like a caring mother. You know, she says, who let you grow up and so handsome? And he says, hi, Granny. And you, young lady, she's talking to Big Barda, what happened to that darling pigtailed girl? Oh, your cheeks were always so red. She invites them in for Jello. It's the strangest thing. And here they are eating Jello, and it's just such a crazy sequence. And as they're eating Jello, Granny Goodness lets one of the persons that she's torturing by starving them to death watch them eat just because she's being a bitch. I mean, it's just incredible. So you see this simultaneously with Granny Goodness. You see her evil side and her wicked side alongside some signs of compassion, that she does have a motherly side, and that clearly, at least in one period of time, it's implied. Well, it's not implied, it's expressly shown that she clearly, unless she's acting, and it's just another deception, that she clearly at a point in time did in fact love Scott, love Mr. Miracle. She goes on to reveal to Scott that basically it was Orion that set them up. She warns Scott that she asked Scott, interestingly enough, she asked Scott if he actually had a dream of Metron the night before. And he said, yes, but I thought it was a dream. And Granny Goodness says, good. But it's not really sure why she thinks that's a good thing. Something is afoot here, but we really don't know what it is. Now Granny Goodness is warning him, saying, look, Orion sent you here. It was basically a trap. Orion sent you here to be killed. That this was basically a trap. And as a reader, I gotta wonder, well, maybe that's true, because you could see the tension at the beginning of the comic between Orion and Scott. And maybe Orion did send them there with the intention that they were going to be killed. And if Orion had the intention, if Orion made an arrangement with Granny to kill Scott and Barda for his own motives, well, that you got to ask why. Now that doesn't happen, of course, because Granny, for whatever reason, Granny Goodness tells Scott that Orion was betraying him, and Granny does not take any lethal actions against Scott. Before their conversation can really end, Big Barda knocks out Granny Goodness, or kills her. I think she kills Granny Goodness. I think it's implied that she's killed, because that was their mission after all. Big Barda and Scott Free's mission was to kill Granny Goodness. And we already know that Big Barda does not like Granny Goodness. And so clearly something is afoot here. And you have to wonder if this whole thing is just a trap. Was it a trap to send Big Barda and Scott to kill Granny Goodness? Granny Goodness told them that they were set there as a trap. Granny Goodness was aware that they were coming, and yet she didn't arrange to have them killed. You gotta wonder why. Something is afoot here. Maybe this is part of some elaborate ploy. And what's interesting is the very last page. It's worth reading in their narration. It says, "It is said that the ultimate trap is the simplest trap. And what could be more simple than entering and leaving a building? For Mr. Miracle, this could mean defeat and death. You'll be mad about his exploits if you swallow the paranoid pill." What is the paranoid pill? I'm not sure what the paranoid pill is, but Mr. Miracle might be feeling a little bit paranoid now. Who can he trust? He wasn't sure he could trust Granny Goodness. He's not sure he can trust Orion. Can he even trust his wife, Big Barda? After all, remember, he thought Big Barda had different color eyes in the first issue. And she corrected him and says, "No, Scott, my eyes have always been brown. They're not blue." But they used to be blue. We know they used to be blue. In DC history, Big Barda's eyes were always blue under Jack Kirby. Now they're brown? Well, they were brown under Darkseid War. But in any event, as a reader, I'm intrigued because I don't know what the truth is. And so once again, this issue just whets my appetite for the third issue for more. The art's it's just really good stuff. Like, Tom King is just hitting it out of the park. This is one of those golden gems that arises when you have a perfect combination of writing with an artist. Mr. Miracle's a great issue. Pick it up. Comic Book Club.